Hello and welcome to a very special episode of R&R's Ask the Expert. Today we're talking all things commercial drying. Sounds simple, but we're diving into a few key topics that aren't necessarily discussed by the masses these days. If you haven't guessed it, my special guest is Howard Howie the Instigator Wolf, principal member of HW3 Group. He is a mentor, industry advocate, my friend, and so much more. Please welcome Howard.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the time and the opportunity.
Yes, this is so overdue. We've worked together for many, many years, actually, my whole career. And now we get to work in a different light. And it's really exciting because we're unlocking some things that generally aren't talked about. I know you touched on this in March of 2022, I believe, with our previous editor, Valerie King. And you kind of talked about, the soft skills that we need in a very hard industry. So we wanted to take it back and make sure that we touched on it. And there's just so much to talk about. So first things first, kind of give a little insights on what drove that March 2022 piece.
Well, the March 2022 piece that's a lot of those topics, regarding commercial or CAT tools had always been aimed at equipment or aimed at mobilization techniques. And it was really aimed at um, things that didn't necessarily put together what you really needed to get into commercial or get perform CATs and or catastrophic loss events. And um, so the way the angle I took was that basically the most important tool is critical thinking. And unfortunately, um, we have been conditioned over the years not to question. And that's death in commercial. Residential, you're on a program, you have contracts or you have agreements, there's less thinking involved. It's a little more mechanical. And there's fewer building materials that you have to consider as far as a range of types of builds. And it's pretty regional. So in a region, most of the homes are going to be fairly similarly built. Commercial, um, and even now, just since I wrote that article, there are so many and did that interview. So there are so many more complications now to commercial that didn't even exist 3 years ago. And so um, it makes it especially important that there's a knowledge base. And unfortunately, the equipment and how well you do the job is like fourth or fifth in that priority list. So I wanted to just shed a little bit of light at that time on what the priorities are, and hopefully we can uh, bring that a little further to light, today and maybe into the future about what those first four priorities are.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think you're going to touch on some of these priorities with my first initial question, which is, can you break down the foundational differences between commercial drying and traditional residential, especially when it comes to scale, timelines, objectives, and you said it best, materials, right? They do differ. I know it's hard to believe, but what does that really truly look like, especially for those who are thinking, oh, I can do this, it's just like residential, but on a bigger scale. What are your thoughts on all of these?
Well, in residential, there's three, maybe four typical build outs, how the building envelope is built. You have a timber frame home, you may have uh, a metal frame home in some states is more popular now. You may have a block or a concrete wall construction. And then, depending upon where you are, you have only a few options as far as how it's insulated, the windows, the flooring, the finishes. There may be plaster, maybe not. Most of them now are some sort of drywall. Um, and the floor coverings are fairly uh, similar, uh, regardless of the type of residence it is, regardless of the appearance. The construction is fairly similar. commercial, um, just if we take flooring, there's at least, just off the top of my head, there's at least 15, 20 other products that are prevalent in commercial and uh, that you don't see in residential, you know. Um, and the reason for those is, there may need to be chemical resistant, it may need to be fire resistant, it may need to be slip resistant. I mean, there's all sorts of different, just in carpet or tile or other types of flooring, you see a lot more concrete, um, true concrete, not masonry, but concrete. Um, and the build outs, there's, 7 or 8 typical build outs in commercial, but that's only of modern building methods. If you go to older buildings, which an old house tends to get torn down, over in Europe, they laugh at us because to them, a recent remodel is 120, 200 years old. That's a recent remodel. For us, anything over 70 years old, the building's probably going to hit the ground because it's cheaper to scrape it than it is and put a new one up than it is to rehab them, just given energy codes and upgraded electrical things like that.
Mhm.
Um, with commercial, that's not necessarily the case. Take an older structure, say, and it's not even that terribly old. Take the Empire State Building. The Empire State Building, built in the 20s, commissioned in the 30s. Um, you're not going to raise that building and put a new one up. You're gonna you're gonna rehab it. You're gonna do the exterior rehab. You're gonna do the interior rehab. Well, when you do the interior rehab on old buildings like that, sometimes they build because they need to be brought up to current building standards. Sometimes they build the building within a building, and then there's a gap between the original building and the building you're actually standing in. And without knowing how that's done, or without knowing how to deal with structural steel, heavy gauge, light gauge, curtain wall construction, how moisture flows through those types of things, you see a lot more um, exterior insulation surfaces. Everybody thinks that EIFS, which was got a bad rap several years ago, went away. It didn't. It's just under a different name. So there's so many variables, and so far we've just talked about flooring and building envelope. You know,
Mhm.
lead line walls. You don't see that in a house. You know, and dealing, especially down in like the Caribbean. When I work in Puerto Rico, lead's a huge deal down there because they use it in their decorative. A lot of stuff that's plaster down there, the Spanish and the French influences use lead for creating their ornamental uh, accents in plaster, where the Italians built it out of plaster of Paris, or the Germans and English built it out of wood,
Mhm.
and then wrapped it in plaster. These, you know, lead was very common. So there's a lot of lead in Puerto Rico, a ton of it. And without understanding that you need to deal with it and how to deal with it, um, responding to a cat, say in Puerto Rico, might be challenging for you. Um, there's double, triple, they use lead not just in, most people say, well, lead line walls, that's x rays, maybe an operating suite, MRI suite.
Mhm.
But they, for many, many years, in fact, close to 100 years, they use lead for sound attenuation. So you'll see it around executive offices, conference rooms, bathrooms, um, elevators, things that you don't necessarily want to hear while you're sitting on the phone, you know. Um, Now they have bit different building techniques, double, triples, gap walls, double walls, staggered stud walls, um, and double, triple um, drywall. And you're going to see a lot more rock wool insulation than you are, and uh, closed cell foam than you're going to see in residential. So there are so many different materials, and all that stuff reacts completely differently from your typical drying job in residential.
Yeah, that's extremely important for people listening. We're not just dealing with your typical home structure, to your point. We're talking about 100-year-old buildings plus. And
Right.
then now all of the fancy ways we started to soundproof ourselves these days. You never know what's in between you and the room next door. Is it really even next door within, a couple of feet? Sometimes it's not.
Right.
I think we've all seen buildings where there's a window, but you can't see into the window because they built over the window, right? So how much is really going on in a commercial building at that point? And you did touch on, the building envelope and the design, but how do commercial building systems like their HVAC, mechanicals, and the types of occupancy demand that they have change the way the drying strategy is developed in commercial environments. And I know you have tons of expertise from buildings that are just for the business, high rises that have several tenants. So, what does that really look like? Because I think sometimes when we're talking about commercial, we often forget about other key parts of the building and the people who occupy the building. So, again, for someone who's listening and thinks that they can really do it, or maybe they've done it wrong for a couple of years, what's your key insights here?
Well, there's three main things from that standpoint that are overlooked. Number one, the electrical. Um, a lot of buildings have a lot less power than you think, especially in hospitality, hotels, and commercial office spaces, just regular office space. Um, but then the converse of that is that uh, you have other buildings that have power, two phase, three phase, that are, well, we it's technically two phase, but in the United States we call it a double pull single phase. So like 240 volt or something. So you'll have two. I've been in commercial buildings. I've seen restorers come into a commercial building. They couldn't figure out why they couldn't get their equipment to run, or they were blowing equipment up because they were getting an adapter to put their 110 or 115 plug onto a 240 plug-in, and then plugging it in, not understanding why that 240 was spinning that air mover three times faster than it should, and then eventually blow it up, or worse, start it on fire.
Mhm.
Um, so there's a lot from electrical to consider. Second is sprinkler systems. Uh, Sprinkler systems, not just from a source, but from the fact that when you're doing a drying and you're setting up your drying system, that the sprinkler system, um, there's different sensitivities, heat sensitivities, um, to set off the head. And if it's like a continually occupied structure, like a hotel or a hospital or something like that, that threshold of heat is going to be lower than, say, a factory. So, without understanding what the heat threshold is and knowing what the color of that little plastic piece is, um, you may set up all your equipment, generate so much heat, and set up the sprinklers and have to do it again. But chances are you won't be doing it again. It'll be somebody else that's doing it again that knows what they're doing. And then the third thing is HVAC. HVAC will mess up your day in commercial in ways that you can't even imagine. And I always tell my students when I'm teaching, and yes, I'm teaching again. And yes, I'm going to be teaching to the public again. Um, but the I've always told students, when you walk into a commercial loss and you're going to take a look at it, you're you were talking. This gets in a little bit into timing and pace. You don't rush out there with a truckload of equipment and start sucking and blowing. You go out there and you evaluate it first, because you may need to. If one, it'll give your crews time to stage because it's going to be a larger um, deal. But two, you need to take two other trades with you. You can't possibly know everything about electric. I don't know everything about electrical. I mean, there's some new HVAC systems out there that I know what they do. I know how they work, but I have no idea what all of the moving parts within the building and what needs to get shut off and what needs to get bypassed and everything else. And with the, especially now with AI, I mean, my brother is the CEO of an AI software AI company that just purchased a facilities software company, and it automates every control system in that building, and it does the diagnostics and the thinking and generates the work orders. Well, the thing is if you don't know that that's being monitored by someone in Dallas or someone in Toronto or Milwaukee or Sydney, Australia or India, which is where the primary locations of these monitoring services are. If you don't understand that someone in another state potentially or even another country has to override the system, you can't do it in the building.
Mhm.
You know, what you'll end up doing is you'll end up starting up your drying system thinking you got everything good as gravy, that those sensors will tell the monitoring service there's something wrong, and it'll adjust to compensate for your drying system, and then you just screwed up your drying system because it'll just start bringing in a bunch of outside air that you don't want. So there's that's just one thing about HVAC. There's the types of HVACs, how air moves through the building, how it leaves the building, how it comes into the building. um, there's 7, 8 primary types of HVAC systems that you have to know something about. Now, if you take my class, you'll know how to identify it and you
Mhm.
know who to call. But um, they those things, if you don't know and you don't know what you don't know, so if you go in just thinking it's a, there's a lot of old school people around in the industry that still think that commercial is just a big ass house. Oh, sorry, a big house. So uh, and it's not. I mean, it's so much more technologically advanced, or it's so much less technologically advanced and so much more durable for the surfaces that it may not even need drying.
Yeah. And I think you said that best too. And it's okay that you used ass as a word. Honestly, we're all adults here. And I think I've said a couple of words my own self a time or two out of excitement. So, hey, but it's the truth. It is so much different. Yes, there's people that are coming through there. Yes, there are components that make up both residential and commercial, but they do differ to your point. And you have to rely on people like yourselves and Jeffrey and Monica and everybody else that's part of the crew, to really help shed light on some of these topics because we've seen and you've seen probably more intimately than most where things do go wrong and you have to come and clean up things, right? So, with that being said, what unique logistical challenges do contractors actually face in commercial drying that they wouldn't encounter in your standard quote unquote residential job? And I know you've touched upon a lot, but I think sometimes people underestimate the scale and the strategy behind things. I think you did touch on something that's really important and it's stabilizing and assessing that I think oftentimes get overlooked. Is there anything else that you want to touch on as far as challenges that contractors may face?
Well, another big difference is the inspection itself. I mean, you don't inspect a commercial loss by yourself. And so many restorers want to be Superman, the guy that's going to save the day, and they end up looking like Captain Chaos, from Cannonball Run. I mean, they end up looking kind of silly because they walk in with, their prick meter and their this and oh, I'm gonna, just start pricking walls and tell you that we're going to throw a bunch of crap in here when you don't even know how the building's built and you have no idea what's behind it. It may be an automatic that you have to remove that drywall that's wet, but unless you know how the building's built, how are you going to know? So you have to have, if you don't have that kind of knowledge, you have to bring somebody that does, an architect, an engineer, someone who specializes in commercial buildings. HVAC, like I said, electrician. Um, the rules are completely different. It's not like you can plug into the kitchen to get yourself a little spider box or start running a bunch of extension cords everywhere. Um, Bringing in an electrician to assess the electrical and assess how you're going to get power distributed through the place um, is huge because power, like I said, is a big deal. HVAC is an even bigger deal. So you need your HVAC expert to go in there, assess the system, figure out who's got to be called to override what, and then do the manual overrides and do the physical inspection of the HVAC system. Um, so you can add that to your plan. A lot of guys don't even consider it. And that's an enormous mistake because a lot of commercial buildings have interior line ductwork. So that just the vapor from the evaporation from that water damage is affecting ductwork. And, so you may think it's a ground level loss, not understanding that you have ductwork that now is impacted, 12 feet above you. So
Mhm.
there's a lot from that standpoint. Then you have the group inspection. You look, I've seen so many restorers come call me in a panic saying, uh-oh, I think I might be over my head. I'll go, what's wrong? Well, I showed up for the inspection and the adjuster showed up with 8 people from the consultant, construction consultants. So
Mhm.
HVAC guy, an electrical guy, a plumbing guy, a flooring guy, a public health guy, or structural guy, whatever. And you went in there by yourself. You know, that's not one, you won't have that job long. The minute the adjuster sees that, they will go to the owner and make sure that you are not on that job by the end of the day. Um, because they know don't know what you're doing if you're not running a hat on a hat. When you coordinate a group inspection, first of all, you should be in charge of it. Don't let other people tell you what to do. If you have custody of that job and you have a signed contract, limit who goes in and out and make people sign in and out and be the coordinator of the inspection, not a participant or a bystander. Be the coordinator of it. Find out who's going to be there so you can make sure you have a hat on a hat. Because I don't let any construction consultant walk around on their own. And if you're by yourself, trust me, the first thing they do to you, scatter. You can't keep your eyes on them all. So you don't know what they're looking at. They won't tell you what they're looking at. They won't tell you what their observations are until you want to get paid.
Interesting how that all works, huh?
Oh, absolutely. But if you brought in your people and they generate their reports after you've generated a ROM, you can adjust, which is a rough order of magnitude, which again, most restorers don't even think about doing. They just think, well, it's time and material. It's open checkbook. No, that's how come it takes you 2 years to get paid.
Mhm.
Um, if you do a rough order of magnitude and preliminary scope, you can adjust it as the experts get their reports done and then get scope agreement before you get too far into this job and devote too many resources. If they have a large business interruption exposure, trust me, that adjuster is going to expedite. If they have a low business interruption exposure, they don't care. And so you have to work with the owner and coach the owner up because it's the owner's obligation, not yours, to communicate with the adjuster.
Right. And I think that's another key one too. I know in residential it's the same way. We should not be communicating with the adjuster. It should be the homeowner or the business owner, right? And I think that's another key thing too because we start to muddy the waters. And this brings me to another question that I think is so key because it's a big topic of discussion whether you're in commercial, residential, large loss, whatever the case may be. How do documentation requirements, KPIs, and communication expectations actually differ between commercial clients and residential clients? We all know that documentation is a very big pain point that we see every day. But in commercial, I think, there's a specific way to do things as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, the funny thing is, it really shouldn't be. But the residential guys figure, well, I'm only going to be here 2.5, 3, 4, 5 days. Why do I need to communicate a work plan? Why do I need to communicate a safety plan? Why do I need to communicate a drying plan? A lot of these things are checklists. You should be able to communicate all that stuff and communicate it to the adjuster up front so they set the reserve correctly. Otherwise, that puts you behind the eight ball when it gets um, audited later by whatever program flavor you're part of. And even if you're not part of a program, they're going to send it because they may have set a reserve for something and you didn't send your Xactimate until 2 weeks later after you were off the job. No communication with the adjuster up front. I've always said there's a technical word for no communication. That's bad. You have to communicate but with commercial, it's got to be structured. There are more materially interested parties involved. So because there's more material interested parties involved, you have to set up a communication tree. You have to have a communication plan. Who's going to be communicated with when? How often are you going to have meetings? Whether they're Zoom, are they going to be in person? What are the expectations for your daily reports? Yes, you have to write a daily report. Because you have to substantiate what you're doing. And it's regardless of the size of the invoice. So I want to say there's no difference. However, given the current state of the industry and how residential is kind of working right now, they're kind of being told what to do. So they don't really need to put as much effort into the communication and documentation as in commercial. Commercial, you have to make sure that you're, you know, they're not going to pay you to prick walls in a 360 room hotel
Hmm.
twice a day. They're going to ask for it, but then when they get it, they're not going to want to pay it because they're going to see how much time it takes. Plus, it's stupid. You're not gonna. By the time the information gets to the project manager to make an adjustment decision, it's old information. So there's other monitoring techniques. There's other ways to get more information faster, so you can communicate that. Use of checklists, work orders. Um, like I said, and the biggest thing is control of who's going in and out of that building.
Yeah.
If you don't have control of the building, you're gonna screw yourself somewhere.
That's key right there. You have to have control. I think that's one of the biggest things. And you should have control on your residential jobs too, right? I mean, if that's
Yeah,
your
absolutely.
responsibility, it still is important. I would definitely say though, to your point in commercial, there's more hands in the cookie jar, if you will. There's more parties that are impacted and interested in the commercial world. And we've talked about quite a few different things, but I think one thing that really makes a difference is skill set, training, and the investment that you make in not only your people, but your equipment. They are very essential. So, with that being said, for contractors who want to responsibly, keyword responsibly, transition from traditional restoration drying at the residential level into commercial drying, what key skills, training, and equipment would you suggest?
Well, first of all, if you learn to think how we think in the commercial world, you'll be amazed at how much cleaner your residential jobs get as far as production, and probably be even more amazed by the fact that you can reduce your days on receivable. Um, because the traditional ways that are still being traditionally taught, um, they're going by the wayside even in residential. And you have to keep up. And I'm not talking use of AI. I'm not talking data logging systems. I'm talking how you process the job. The process management matters. And if you learn how to process the way we process in commercial and apply it to your residential, you're going to improve your company from a profitability, a productivity, less headaches standpoint. And first one being create a culture of safety in the company. If you create a culture of safety, it becomes part of your profit center and not extra overhead that you just hope, everybody says, well, OSHA's not going to show up on my job. Guy electrocutes himself and ends up hard down on the floor. OSHA's going to show up.
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, it's just going to happen. So because when that guy gets taken to the hospital, the first thing they're going to say is it's work related. What happened? As soon as that gets done, the hospital's obligated to report it to OSHA. Well, guess what? I've seen more restoration companies lose so much business and some even go out of business because they have no concern for worker safety. If you make it part of your culture and make it part of your thinking, the rest of it sequentially falls into place because safety is all about, everybody thinks it's about, well, throw up some plastic with some zip bowls and I'm good, I'm done. Throw some PPE on the guys, whether they know how to fit it, use it, wear it, and whether they do out in the field or not. You trained them, don't know. That's the way a lot of people pursue safety. Whereas safety is more about the analysis. It's about identifying the hazard and did you correct the hazard? Did you protect people from the hazard? And that works in your work plan. And so if you're evaluating that on a regular basis, you're showing progress in the job. And so if you, like I said, if you incorporate that into the culture, the communication, the checklist, the work plans, all of that starts to fall into place. And it falls into place because it's required by federal regulation and
Mhm.
not what a book says that I'm using as a shield and a software that I'm using as my sword to weaponize what I do. You're complying with a federal regulation, and that overrides anything else.
Yeah, and to your point about, safety, I'm just gonna kind of share some insights on that. OSHA cites several violations a year. I'm being nice here. And you are no stranger to Barry Rice with Signal Restoration Imperial Clean, and that man lives, eats, breathes, sleeps safety. And we have talked about this for quite some time. And, one thing that I think that you really made very clear is safety is a culture. And the reason why I brought up Barry is because him and I have kind of gone down that rabbit hole of the top 10 OSHA violations. And, they all pertain to us. Even though we may want to deny that they do, I mean, slip, trips, and falls are huge. Hazard assessments and communication is one that's cited for. And those things are key in the commercial side of things and also residential. But I think the point that you're making here is, it becomes second nature. It's not, oh yeah, safety. That's right. I need to put on some PPE and put up containment. We'll get to that. No, it's you live, eat, and breathe that you have daily safety meetings and things like that. And then training, commercial training is a lot different than what we see day to day, right? And I know you specialize in that with your team. And it's really important if you're going to dabble in something new like commercial, you need to go to the right sources to train. And I think, Howie, you've probably seen it quite a bit where you go and clean up and they haven't been trained, right? So what's the
Oh yeah,
importance of that part of having that training and going to a reliable source too? I think that's a really big deal too.
it, the training is hugely important, but you don't need to send everybody through a full blown OSHA training. But you do need to send your supervisors. Once you send your supervisors through, as long as they're doing what they're doing pro OSHA regulation, which is training guys every morning, have that 10-minute tailgate talk, make everybody sign in that they took that training. One day maybe how to properly wear a respirator. One day maybe properly how to do fall protection. One day maybe how to climb a ladder, how to hold a hammer. I mean, there's so many different things that could be talked about, but that does a couple of things. Number one, it proves to OSHA that you care about it. And so they might overlook a couple of things, but if someone got hurt, you're still screwed.
Yeah.
The second thing is it reinforces a culture. And because it reinforces the culture, it makes everybody think. And if you're reminding them every dang day, it's going to sink in at some point in time. And if not, you need to get rid of them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the hard truth. It's funny. I've always made fun of Southern Cats. There's a guy by the name of Jason Henry. He's now the president of Southern Cat. I always asked him if he actually had high visibility vest pajamas. I never saw him without a high visibility vest on. I mean, I swear the guy slept in it at night. And now that he's president, he wears a suit coat like me, but he probably has the vest on underneath because the guy probably just can't do without it anymore. But he brought a culture of safety to Southern Cat, and Southern Cat is now one of the safest organizations. Signal, same way. Signal now has gone. I've just got a text from Barry and Mark Davis, who are all giddy that they have now gone 4 years without a significant time loss accident. I mean, that's huge for a company that large. That's a big deal. That means it's part of their culture. And having a guy like Barry, who, it's funny because guys like to joke with Barry. Oh, well, here's the safety guy coming. Every construction trade company does that. They tease the safety guy, but Barry's a diligent guy, and he will make sure that you're doing it. But it's reinforced by ownership.
Yeah.
The ownership has to support that culture. And in the case of both Southern Cat and Signal, they do that. So, and they get a better work product as a result.
Well, I would say too, to your point, those are just two examples, but it's possible.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing, right? Like, I think sometimes we think some things are impossible, but those are statistics that are very true. I know that they're very proud. And to your point, it's overall in the whole company, especially with the upper management, leadership, ownership, it makes a huge deal. And I know that you live, eat, and breathe everything you do every single day, even in the training world. And for those of you watching, fun fact, we're going to have Howie and Jeffrey and Monica and maybe some surprise guests do a large loss panel and then a Q&A because I think this is one thing that we don't often get to talk about on a regular basis is extremely important. That's kind of what this has segued into because again, we're seeing gaps, we're seeing mistakes happen, and that's the one thing we don't want to see happen because it affects us all in this professional space. I don't have anything else. I think we covered quite a bit. I know we will have a follow-up in sometime very soon. Do you have any closing words before we sign off?
No, not really. I think that as long as if anybody's truly interested, you and I are going to be doing from what I understand, a couple more things. I'm in the process of writing a couple articles for you and stuff. And if you have questions, just reach out. I mean, I'll help anybody for 5 minutes before I start charging you. No, just kidding.
No, he's absolutely free. And, for now, for advice purposes only, I will say. But if you ever need to get in touch with him or any of his team, please let me know.
Yeah.
They are very accessible. They love this industry and everything that we do. And Howard, it was a pleasure as always. I can't wait to have you back on. And for all of you watching, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Ask the Expert. Take care.